Hey, all you people out there. This is Michelle My Belle.
She's trying to get creative. I love it.
I like to catch Julie off guard.
I know. I'm waiting to see what she's going to say the first time. Anyway, hey, all you people out there. Hi, Shelley. How's it going?
I'm good.
Good. We are on a Sunday and just hanging out. Had a little night at home last night.
Yeah. We stayed in.
Hung
out, drank vodka tonics with lime.
With lime.
That's my new jam.
I know because...
Thanks, MB. Shout out to you.
Shout out to MB for...
Zero sugar tonic.
Yeah.
No less.
That doesn't make it any
I feel
better.
pretty good about drinking that because it's gluten-free. Tito's, of course. Zero sugar on the tonic and then a little squeeze of like lime.
And then the vodka doesn't turn into sugar or something?
I'm saying it doesn't. I don't know, but
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I'll just take that it doesn't because that's why it's gluten-free. That's why it's the number one choice.
It's made from potatoes.
Isn't it? I don't think so. I don't know. We're getting too technical. All I know is it's gluten-free and I'll take it.
I'm asking her too many questions.
Yes.
She doesn't like it when I do that. Anyway, we're happy to come today to the table, literally at the table, with a topic that we feel might be really worthy of hearing about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll let you get into it, Julie, and then I'll say why it's interesting.
This is about all the different generations that are out there right now.
And I was going to say it's interesting because I've heard of them all. I usually, if somebody says now, who are the boomers or who's the greatest generation? I usually have to Google it to see the time frame and to see all this and to really dive into what the differences are and how they have come through this century. It's pretty interesting.
Well, it makes you kind of understand things about people that are older than you. And honestly...
And younger.
All the things. I mean, yeah. But it also makes me understand my mom a little bit better.
Yeah.
Because some of the things that they're talking about here are just like...
To a T.
To a T. And it makes sense because, you're raised by people who have those thought processes and then, you do things differently in your generation. And that's where some of the tug and pull probably comes from. So anyway, we're looking at the variations of ideas, attitudes, the values that people have amongst these different groups that were born in different times really does affect a lot of things, like the workplace.
Well, and like what you were just saying, as we move through generationally, I think I said on the last episode something about the fact that we are now our parents. Because of what our thought processes are on the younger generation. And it's very similar to those attitudes that we would get from our parents.
Yeah.
So it continues.
It continues. And it's like when you look at some of the things from, our kids' age, really, I mean, and down, younger than us or whatever, you see a dramatic change just in their communication style and what's important and just attitude. Yeah. And just the confidence level. There's so many different things that all kind of make sense. So when I was doing this research, I tried to focus on just a couple of different aspects of these different generations, specifically the things that they went through in that particular time period that they're considered to be a part of, and some of the milestones that took place, in the world, sort of a thing. And then how that impacted things like, their work performance or their view on things like work or their view on things like parenting. So there's so many different things that really you can attribute to a lot of these generations, but this is a small list, I guess is what I'm saying. There's a lot of other things that we probably aren't going to even touch on today.
This is really an interesting, thought-provoking topic that we're going to be talking about today because it's kind of a brain bender.
A little bit of a perplexing when you're going through it.
Yeah.
Like when we were doing our research and stuff, you have to remember that the people were born during these time frames, but they didn't become young adults until later, which is when a lot of this stuff...
The events start happening.
Right.
Yeah. So...
But how they were raised is, from the generation prior, so they may have some of those characteristics as well. So it is a tiny bit confusing. And I think we both kind of agree on that.
Yeah.
But it's helpful to see some of the broader characteristics that might be of these particular generations and help you to, kind of understand the people around you.
I just think that, and I think it's important to know where we've come from.
I know.
It's a lot of stuff that we hear about that we were taught in school. when we're thinking about, and in case we weren't clear, we're talking about all the different labels for the generations.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll dive deep and get into that. I'm a Gen Xer.
Mm-hmm.
Julie.
I'm technically fighting it. I'm the last year of the baby boomers, but I really would say that I would probably identify with maybe a couple things from there, but more from the Generation X.
So these are all things, these generational things we hear about. It was good for me to see when these people were born, some of the famous people that coincide with that as well. So we'll shout out to some of the famous people that go along with these time periods. And then, some of the things that happened and where we journeyed through and what we've learned from it and all of that stuff. And how we grew up and...
Right. The one thing, too, I want to note, I think Michelle calls them disclaimers, is that this is very general. We're talking about qualities or characteristics of this time frame when people were born in this time frame. So it doesn't apply to everybody, right? I guess is what I'm saying. So just keeping that in mind when I was looking at it from my own perspective, I'm like, a couple of these things apply to me, a couple of them don't, but it definitely is helpful to have an idea.
And also crossover, to your point. You're a boomer / Gen X. There's definitely crossover between all of these generations. Yeah.
And if we're looking at like generational differences, we're really talking about the variations in the ideas people had, the attitudes and things that they had, the values that they shared, with each other, and the time period that they were born, and how a lot of them were influenced by the generations prior, just like we have been. Yep. So I was saying to Michelle, we were talking about this before we started recording, and there's so many different aspects you can focus on, so I really kind of I tried to focus a little bit on like the work ethic and what that kind of looks like by generation, and then parenting styles by generation. I think is kind of interesting because we've been raised by different generations, and the belt was a big thing back when I was a kid, and before that it was like kind of just accepted, and it's like you would never see things like that now. No. So just things like that. Yeah. Anyway, do you want to get started off?
So the kickoff, and it's for this century that we're living in. So the first generation of this century were the people born between the years of 1901 and 1927. So these are the ones considered the greatest generation, which is actually a term that was made famous by Tom Brokaw, the book that Tom Brokaw did. So, and I really kind of like it. I think there's a lot of things that the people that were born during those years that they went through, came through. There were a lot of things happening in the United States, in the world at that time. Example, the Greatest Depression.
Yeah. And the Depression was in 1929. And, the only thing that people today might be able to compare that to would be the crash that happened in 2007, 8, 9, right around in that time frame. This was 10 times worse than what we experienced in that time frame. It was horrible.
The Great Depression, my mom talks about, hosiery with the seam up the back was a big thing. They would draw it. They would draw a line up the back of their leg because they couldn't afford the hosiery. Things like that. Yeah. Minimal scarcity, all of that.
Yeah, because World War II was, of course, going on.
World War II.
Towards when these people were becoming of age or becoming young adults, a lot of them were going off to war. And so the population itself was different than what you would see normally because there were so many men that were gone. Yeah. And women were not in combat or anything then. They were home, maybe doing Rosie the Riveter. You guys have heard about that. They were the Rosie the Riveter people, but they also were raising the families, keeping food on the table, doing everything on the home front while people were gone to war. So you're right when you talk about the scarcity mindset. It was just really trying to keep things together and make ends meet, so to speak.
It was also the golden age of Hollywood. Yeah. Those folks born that were considered the greatest generation. Who are some of those people?
Well, people that you'll know, like Marilyn Monroe. I mean, she's still considered like a sexy pinup, right?
She is an icon.
Yeah, she's an icon, but she is from this generation. From a political standpoint, JFK was from this generation. Okay. And Richard Nixon, believe it or not. Yeah, he was from this generation as well. So there were definitely some some people that had come out of that time frame that everybody knows about. The Roaring 20s took place, obviously, while these people were born.
Side note, I would have loved to have been alive during the Roaring 20s. I don't know why. It just looks like so much fun.
Well, yeah, we see all the things about the flapper dresses and
the dancing. That's when jazz and swing music was big. And I think there was a lot of fun to be had during those times because everything was so bleak and dismal.
I know.
With the Depression happening. So, to go out and really have a good time, I'm sure was
a big deal. And you weren't spending a ton of money doing it either.
Right.
I don't know how you would have felt about the Roaring 20s.
Why?
Because Prohibition was in place.
I mean,
Michelle, you would have been one of the people at the speakeasy. She would have been the person who, has the knock. They'd have to have a special knock.
I would have known the knock. I would have known the secret
password.
Yep, all of it. Yep.
Because she would have her vodka tonic, right there in the basement of some building that you had to get through some scary door to get to. So Prohibition was during the 20s, 1920 to 1933.
Okay.
So during this time frame, and coincidentally during the Great Depression, that was probably when people needed it the most. But it was definitely a thing. Yeah. So a lot of underground bootlegging, all that kind of stuff.
No wonder I want to be back there.
I know. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she'd be bootlegging her moonshine, So these people, the Greatest Generation, are actually parents then to boomers. And they are grandparents to Gen Xers, which we're going to get into all of those a little bit later. But this is important to note because when you think about our generations, whenever you were born, you're obviously going to be influenced by the generation prior to you because they're the ones who raised you.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're necessarily going to follow in their footsteps, which we're going to see a little bit later, but definitely plays a role, I think, in how you were raised. Like, for example, I think I mentioned about, well, maybe I didn't, I don't know, but about discipline.
You're talking about the belt.
Yeah, the belt. This time frame, it's like people got the belt.
Yeah.
It was a much more, you didn't ask how people were feeling. The kids didn't probably have as much emphasis placed on
self-awareness on their emotions.
Exactly. You were not allowed to cry. Boys didn't cry, that kind of thing. So you were tough. People were a little tougher.
And probably had to be.
Exactly. I think they did have to be.
Probably had to be. I think families, they had to do whatever they could to make ends meet.
Yeah.
Because they had bigger families back then too.
Yeah.
I think than we do now.
Yeah. I think when you went kind of into more of the baby boomer generation, which we'll talk about, there's definitely bigger families there.
Yeah.
But these were times that were just struggling times, when
there probably was no birth control. I would, so it makes sense that families were big. And I think also that more hands, it's not why they had children, but they farmed and did a lot of productivity that way on the home front.
Yep.
So
and kids were working.
Yeah, they were doing that.
Maybe not going to school.
Yeah.
Because they were working in the family. Yeah. That was a priority. So again, I think a lot of this is directly related to the socioeconomic backgrounds of these people too, because if you came from money or you had more privilege, for example, then some of these things you may never have experienced.
Right.
But that's why we were talking about it being not necessarily the same for everybody. Yeah. Kind of a thing. So yeah, that was the Greatest Generation. And
I love it.
Yeah. And that name really came from World War II, because people pulled together. The country was super united. There were a lot of personal sacrifices that were made during that time frame by Americans in general, just to keep the country going while the war was happening and such. So very proud generation.
For sure.
Yeah. And you see, I mean, even to this day, I will see an elderly man with his World War II hat on and he's a veteran and he's so proud, you know, because it was probably one of the most pivotal points in their life. And there is such a level of pride that goes along with being in the service back then. Yeah. Contrary to what you saw like in the 60s, for example.
Right. And see, I'm sitting here thinking too of the elderly couple that are still together that have been married for 75 years. Yep. Because she waited for him when he went off to war and they built all, they wrote letters together. They wrote letters. They did all those things. And the commitment that there was to self, family, and country was like no other time, I would say.
Yeah. So that was the greatest generation.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is kind of funny because, well, it's not funny, but it's ironic that it's called the silent generation, but nobody even knows about it. It's ironic, don't you think?
Yeah, I was singing that song.
I mean, I have not really heard too much about the silent generation, but it's the one that's between the baby boomers and the greatest generation.
Yeah.
So
I'd never heard of it.
Well, maybe it's been called other things before. I don't know, but it's kind of this time frame, and we have people that we know, like my mom is from that time frame. Your mom is from the greatest generation time frame. But some of the characteristics of this time frame, they resonate with me because I see them still even in my mom.
Yeah.
And she wasn't even from this country, came here in the 60s, but she was raised with very similar values and things that you see here, when she came here. What were some of the major events that were happening?
Well, I was going to say it's kind of crazy. Again, it's for me a brain bender because I have to think about the period that these people were born in.
Correct.
And then it was later in their life that the events start happening. So the fall of the Nazis, the nuclear bomb, recognizing communism as the enemy, all these things, the Cold War.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess we should say what the years are.
And
1928 to 1945.
28 is when these people were born.
Born, yes.
So then later on is when the events that I just spoke of, were happening. Yeah. And it's at a time in their life where it's so impactful.
Right. And you have to think too, both of these generations really had different ways of communicating than we do today. Letter writing was a bigger deal. Yeah. There was no television. There were no cell phones.
Yeah.
Were there phones? There were phones, but it was probably like party lines, everybody shared them.
Yes.
So it's funny. I think I was like, did they not have phones? Can you imagine? Can you imagine? They didn't have computers. They didn't have any of that kind of stuff. So word of mouth was how a lot of information got out. Newspapers were big back then because that's where
extra
read all about it. Yep. That was all. And that was even like one of the famous pictures of the end of World War II is this sailor who's hugging and like has this girl, he's bent her over and he's giving her a kiss. It was like on the front page of the newspaper. Mm-hmm. The war has ended, and there's all that stuff. Do you know what picture I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a real picture that some photographer had taken. And literally that was when the war had been announced. Kind of gives me chills thinking about it, So
who are some famous people?
Oh gosh.
From that time frame?
People that you would know, definitely. So
here we go. Now is where we start to feel a little bit old.
Yeah. Well, no, when we get to the other ones, I'm like, I don't know any of these people. I'm like, okay, then I definitely feel old. Well, people like Robert De Niro is from the silent generation.
Okay.
Yeah. And Julie Andrews.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, time frame that she was born. Yeah. These are obviously,
the
actors.
Hills are alive
with the sound of music. But even that Sound of Music movie had World War II in it, kind of interesting how that worked. Eric Clapton, Jane Fonda, who she actually was not well received during the Vietnam War because of some comments and political stuff that she had stated, and people weren't real happy with her that were in support, I guess, of the soldiers in the war or whatever.
Got it.
Harrison Ford.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So all these actors came from that time frame.
I recognize all of those people.
But what is the one quality that I found so interesting I had shared with you of the people who are from this generation? Do you remember?
I don't.
Oh, they are working within the system. They are not working against the system. They're just taking everything at face value.
Okay.
Keeping their heads down, working hard, just trying to make ends meet, but just not a lot of pushback, not a lot of challenging of anything.
Except for Jane Fonda.
Well, she was older and she's kind of an outlier.
Right. Yeah.
She's a little bit of an outlier here that she did that during the Vietnam War. But there were a lot of things that took place, like you mentioned, like the fall of the Nazis, the whole end of the war. These were huge things that had happened in this era when they were just coming of age. They also, in this generation, became parents at a much earlier age than other generations. And some of this might have to do with the end of World War II, and our population obviously drastically changed after that. And so that could be part of it.
This was a generation that also popularized divorce.
Right. I wonder why that is.
So a lot of divorces were seen in this generation, and that's kind of when it started. Because prior to that, greatest generation.
Yeah. People just stayed married and hated each other.
Yeah,
well, that still happens. That still that still happens, but
it's just what you did.
That's just what you did.
It's just what you did.
I mean, you were a pariah if you got divorced. And even going into the 60s time frame, which is when a lot of this, like the sexual revolution we talked about last week, was happening. That's when a lot of these choices that people were starting to make were becoming more readily available and more accepted.
Right.
So yeah, that was kind of what was going on then. They raised their children to be seen and not heard. So the next generation that comes after this one is the baby boomer generation.
Okay.
And that one is from 1946 to 1964.
So people were born.
They were born during that time frame, and they would have been the children that were raised with that whole adage of be seen and not heard.
So, and I think they probably kind of flipped the script on that because they didn't like that.
Well, yeah.
The baby boomers, I would imagine.
Yeah, once they had an idea, I think, of what was going on and would definitely have more of a voice. So these are some of the things that I look at when I'm looking at this generation, because I think there's definitely some qualities that I think about in like myself or the people that I'm around that are our age now. They don't take things at face value. They don't just go with the flow necessarily all the time. They do challenge things in authority. And I think a lot of that is counter to what they were raised and saw.
Yeah.
Not sticking up for yourself, not pushing back on things that were wrong, whatever the case may be. And they chose to do things differently.
Definitely probably didn't feel like they had a voice.
Well, I wonder, and so going into the time frame when they're coming of age, what's happening? It's the Vietnam War.
Right.
It is the civil rights movement, the sexual revolution we spoke about, where there's a lot more experimenting, a lot more questions being asked, a lot more defiance toward authority. And I think
that makes sense.
It is.
Just based on the previous generation.
Yeah.
Why things were taking a turn like that in so many different aspects. Yeah. Like they were.
So some of the people, you want to know who some of the people are that kind of come from this
boomers.
generation?
Okay, boomer.
These are boomers. Okay. And some of them are older boomers. Some of them are a little bit younger boomers, but Frank Sinatra as an example. Yeah.
Okay.
He's an older baby boomer, obviously, but he's definitely a baby boomer. One of my favorite actresses is Sandra Bullock.
Oh, she's a boomer?
She's a boomer, but just barely.
Barely a boomer.
She's like our age, maybe a year older or two than me.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but she's a boomer.
Okay.
Oprah. Super successful Oprah, who came from, nothing back in the day and made herself to be, kind of this empire that she has. This guy's local to us, Bill Gates.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Very resourceful, with
Bill's a boomer.
Bill is a boomer. And you know who this performer is? Elton John. Elton John is a boomer.
Yeah.
And he's an older boomer. I think he's in his 70s
I don't
or something.
know how old Elton John is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just know he's older than me.
Yeah.
And Meryl Streep.
Okay.
And she actually
some of them make sense. I'm like, okay, I see them as a boomer, but then some of them are like, but
I just think about her like in Sophie's Choice, did you ever see that movie?
Mm-mm.
So it's a movie that during World War II where she had to either give up her baby or give up her son when they were going to I think they were going to the concentration camps or something.
Never want to make that choice.
Yeah, Sophie's Choice is the name of the book. Okay. Anyway, but yeah, she was a baby boomer, or she still is a baby boomer. She's around still. So lots and lots and lots of things were happening during this time frame that were, I think, pretty pivotal in our society. And these folks it's a large group of people that now are in the workplace and are kind of getting either retired or they're getting ready to retire. And so they're coming into workplaces, for example, that have millennials and have Gen Xers and all of these other generations. And baby boomers are a kind of a different breed, much more simple in how they approach things. That work ethic is definitely still there. They definitely have more of a workaholic tendency, I would say. And a lot of that just comes from being able to make sure they're taking care of their families. And one of the things I came across so many times is that they want better for their children.
Better than what they had.
Better than what they had, which also comes, from the generations prior to them. So you can kind of see how they all line up together.
A domino effect.
Very much so. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. A domino effect. And they're parents of Gen Xers and millennials. And those are very different, obviously, with how they're approaching the life that they have too. So,
what's crazy is my parents were from the greatest generation, and I'm a Gen Xer.
I know. Well, you had...
It's part of having 8 kids. They stretched across many generations. But
this friend of mine, he's 47, I think. His dad just turned 90.
Wow.
And he's 47.
Wow.
And he's the youngest of 8. Same as you. Yeah. But it was kind of weird because it's like my mom, it just turned 90, and I'm much older than that. So I was like, how did that even happen?
You're much older than 90?
Yeah.
I know what you were saying.
I'm much older than 47.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. In light years. Yeah. Anyway, so you may have a parent that is from a generation 2 away from you.
It's crossover.
Yeah,
there's crossover there.
Yeah.
I think the baby boomers too, there was a big focus, to your point, when they wanted better for their children than what they had. Big focus on going to college, making that a big priority.
I think that's really continued on.
I feel like though it has become lost more and more recently because it's so financially difficult.
Yeah. It's pretty cost prohibitive
to make that happen.
And if you are in a situation where you make too much money, which is not even that much money, then you don't even get any kind of federal aid or anything like that. So that kind of sucks. But they did really want to make sure that they were doing better for their children. So college being a priority is one of those things. And I do believe that's carried on because now you have more college educated people who are with children who are becoming more college educated,
carry on the torch.
Yeah. They're also the people that were coming out of that time frame of the sexual revolution. And so the experimenting and the openness to sex in general, they'd sown their oats more. They probably had more experience with it.
Right.
So weren't as frigid about all of those things. Keeping in mind too, though, that the parents that they had were very much that way. And the generation prior to that was very much that way. So you started seeing things transition a little bit, more during this time frame.
More in touch with your feelings.
Yes.
Emotions, caring about how your children were feeling.
Yep.
Those kinds of things.
Like actually talking to them about it.
Yeah. So moving on, the next generation is the Gen Xers. You hear a lot about this generation. I think I see a lot anyways and hear a lot about the Gen Xers on social media.
Yeah.
Because this was the time folks were born between 1965 and 1980. And these are the ones that you hear a lot about how we played outside all day. We drank water from the garden hose.
Yep.
We didn't come home until the streetlights came on.
There were no helmets.
There were
you rode your bike.
No helmets, no car seats. We didn't use our seatbelts.
Nope.
We piled in a station wagon, and just a lot of rough and rugged living of life. And I think about that because I am a Gen Xer. I mean, and these are things for you too. You talk about that crossover.
Oh yeah,
Same
totally.
Things for you. I would be gone all day and come home for dinner, but there's no checking in on.
Well, there's no phone.
The phone. I mean, there's phone at people's house. So that just wasn't a thing.
No,
it's
not
like,
at
I'm
all.
going over to Pam's house. I'll be back later.
Be back before dark.
We would eat dinner at the table every night. I think most families did during those years. So this is like 70s because, I was born in 1965. So early 70s, mid 70s. It was a great.
It was a great time to be a kid.
I
mean, it was just a lot simpler than it is now.
So much simpler.
Which in a lot of respects makes me kind of sad for the generations that are, our kids' generations. It's like we've raised them the way that we would raise them and they're fine, but they will never, ever, ever experience the things that we experienced.
Right.
And it was so much easier really to be a kid. You didn't deal with social media. You weren't dealing with any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's the fashion or having to keep up with, the hair and the nail, all these
expectations
that now you see teenage girls. I'm speaking obviously just of girls right at the moment, but it's like, there's so different, and there's so much disconnect from everything going on like in your immediate moment because there's so many things taking your attention. So yeah, Gen Xers had it a little bit easier in that regard. I don't even think it was about trust from your parents or anything. I think a lot of it was just that's just how it was.
And there used to be a thing on like the 10 o'clock news and it was like not an announcement. It was like, it's 10 o'clock before the news was start. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are?
Yeah.
It was like this gentle reminder. If your kids aren't home, they should be. Street lights are on. News is on.
Yeah.
Time for them. It was just a very different time.
Well, I think that people from this time frame too have become more independent. They grew up to be more independent because not all the time. Yeah. Parents were, both parents might have started working or one parent was not home or there was more divorce going on. So single parent households even. So you saw like the rise of like latchkey kids, for example, things like that. But at the same time, the parents, when they were involved, was a little different than what you might see. It's kind of a carryover, I think, from a lot of the later years of the baby boomer generation, because I kind of identify with some of this stuff. The Gen X is the notorious generation for having helicopter parents. Did you know that?
Gen X?
Gen X, yeah. With their kids. Like more oversight on their kids.
Oh, so me with my kids.
Yes. Us with our kids. I could say
that.
I could say that I have had helicopter tendencies.
Well, here's the thing. Because we knew what we were doing without phones and like without everybody knowing what you're doing.
Yeah.
We were those kids. So we have all that in our brain and it's like, we are not stupid to that.
No.
So
explains
why we would be helicopter parents because technology is now evolving, right? So we have these ways and means of keeping tabs on our children that we didn't have to,
Yeah.
So again, we're flipping that script.
Yep.
We're doing the 180. Our parents they didn't have a way to.
They didn't have a way to, and they didn't really worry about it. I mean, now I wouldn't even let my kids go out and play in the front yard because I didn't want anybody to grab them.
Yes. There's so much, the technology, like I said, because you're getting this influx of all this back to Oprah Winfrey.
Yeah.
You would watch Phil Donahue, Oprah Winfrey, all these talk shows, and they would talk about, children being abducted and all the things happening. And so you have access to all this information that heightens your anxiety about everything. Yeah. So I make no apologies for being a helicopter parent.
I think there's different types of helicopter parents.
If I was one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I was. To a certain degree.
Parents from this time frame too have been more actively involved in what's going on with their kids' lives too. Whereas the ones before maybe weren't.
In so many ways, like school, all the things, because, I went to school, I would bring home the report card. I'm sure maybe there were parent-teacher conferences. It was nothing that I ever remember. So, and I would do my schoolwork at school. I never really brought homework home.
Yeah.
And so when I had kids, it was completely different.
Yep.
The parent-teacher conferences, there were these packets that they would send home and you'd have to sign it and make sure they read for 20 minutes and sign that. And there was a lot.
A lot going on.
And I know there's a lot more now. So hats off to all your parents out there with children in school. But it was just a really different. Yeah. So I think adapting to all that and trying to really figure out how to maneuver through it and having the ways and means to keep tabs on your children.
Yeah. Which, I mean, even a lot of them having cell phones so young, it's like I was very adverse to that. I did not like that idea. I didn't want them to have it, but it's like they're also kind of outcasts when they don't have the way to communicate. I think it's a little different now because when our kids were young, this is when a lot of this stuff was actually just starting to come out.
Yes.
The computers were all very new. Phones were relatively new, or they were those big brick phones, There were not smartphones. They simply there was no texting, that kind of thing. Yeah. These folks in this generation are definitely more in tune with parenting and being mindful of what's happening with their children.
And I have an old school mindset where Gen Xers are analog, digital. We know how to give change.
Oh, thank you. Do you notice that at the store? I noticed that where they literally
paper. Yeah. We use paper and take notes.
Yeah.
We give change without a computer because we use our brain to do it. So those are the kinds of things that
I've noticed that a lot. Like you go buy when you're at the store and you go buy something with cash or something that they don't know, or you give them a penny so you can get
It's painful.
It's painful. And it's like, and it's not that they're not educated.
It isn't.
It's just that they're not educated
They didn't have to do that.
No.
Everything it's a cashless society.
Just like cursive writing.
That
No
too.
cursive writing.
See, listen to us. Yeah. Gen X, that's what I say. We're the greatest generation.
That's the next greatest generation. Hey, do you want to hear who some of the very famous Gen Xers?
Yeah.
There's a ton, actually.
Yeah.
I'll just name a few. Halle Berry.
Oh, yeah.
Actor. Yeah. Drew Barrymore, she's also an actress. Brad Pitt. Kobe Bryant. R.I.P.
The GOAT.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then Eminem. One of my faves. Eminem. Yeah. Janet Jackson.
Yeah.
And this one, actually, I would have not thought of him as a Gen Xer. I don't know why, but Elon Musk.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't
How
know.
old is he?
I don't know, but he's born between 65 and 80.
Obviously.
Yeah. So those were some of the people. These are just a few names that we came up with that were a part of that generation. But this generation, what did they go through? What are some of the things that were happening?
I was just going to say some of the things that were happening for these folks is the AIDS epidemic. I remember that in high school when that started to be a thing.
And it's like when you're starting to become, sexually active or really interested in learning about it. And it's like, what was a condom? I mean, none of that stuff really existed.
Yeah.
Or people didn't use it, I guess. Maybe, I don't know. But that was scary.
Yeah.
That was scary. And it didn't.
Was so unknown too.
Yeah. And I mean, I knew someone that had contracted that and died from it. And it was horrible death for him. So that was something that I think that changed the landscape.
I want my MTV. That was a whole thing.
I remember watching it the first time. And it was the very, very first time I ever saw it. I was the summer after I graduated from high school. And it was on the TV at someone's house or something.
Yeah.
And it was I think it was Michael Jackson, like some video with Michael Jackson. But yeah, MTV culture.
I mean, music television, hello. It is not even like that anymore. MTV it changed and evolved.
Well, that's because we have the internet.
A whole other thing. But yeah, so MTV, that was a big culture during that time. Video games and computers started to become a thing.
Like Pac-Man and Tetris and those kinds of games that were out there. Yeah, those were there. Women's sports, girls' sports, Title IX sports started becoming more prominent, which was definitely not the case. It's usually everything's focused on boys' sports, in high schools and such, in colleges. I mean, so, those became more readily available for women as options in school. The internet. I remember someone teaching me about the internet. Like, I was like...
That was the weirdest thing when all that started happening.
I was like, explain this to me. I don't understand.
And email and .com. Yeah, the whole .com.
The meltdown.
It was just very interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot going on. Now, some of these things didn't really impact us. I mean, .com bubble thing didn't impact me at all. I mean, I really wish I would have bought Microsoft stock at that time, but I probably didn't know anything about stock either. I mean, it was definitely a time when there's a lot of people that retired early.
And we were parents to millennials. So, and I can remember volunteering. Parenting and volunteering was just a big thing, I think, with that generation to be involved like that.
Yeah, and I got to be the room parent.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I remember doing stuff like that.
Well, the school the kids went to, the schools they went to, the one that they spent the majority of their time at, it was a requirement to have 40 hours of volunteer time. So we did recess duty. We did a lot of different things, that were just helping around the school.
You have 3 kids. What are they? Are they all the same, or
no? They're not.
Generation they're from?
Andrew, my oldest, is a millennial, and then Zoe is the next generation down, which we'll talk about, is a Gen Zer, and so is Jared.
Okay,
yeah,
I have 3 millennials and a Z.
Yeah, so. I definitely see a difference.
Big difference
in how they communicate.
Yes,
what's important to them.
Big difference.
Big difference. And just their voice. They have a voice. It's very different than kind of like when we were growing up, the earlier parts of when we were growing up.
So on to these millennials then, since we raised them.
We still, in times I think we still are.
Yes, raised and are still raising. Yeah. These are folks, I was going to say children. These are the ones that were born between the years of 1981 and 1996.
So they're also called Gen Y. Millennials are called Gen Y.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just so you know, Gen X, Gen Y.
Why?
Why? Because we like you. I don't know. That's just, I'm just saying.
MOUSE.
Yeah. It is I think it's been coined millennials just because the time frame is when they're coming into their own is in the new century.
That's interesting. I mean, I've never heard Generation Y.
Really?
Or Gen Y. Gen Z, Gen X, yes, but not Gen Y. But I've always heard of millennials.
Well, that's just because that's what they're called.
Okay. These are kids that had a childhood with the internet.
Right.
So these are digital natives, right?
They pick it up awfully quick, too.
Yes. And cell phones, that was just normal. And these are and I'm thinking about my own kids. It's, when they're a little bit older. Mm-hmm. Yeah, cell phones were
It's like
normal.
we wanted to be able to keep in touch with them.
The Razor and the BlackBerry.
Oh my gosh, yeah, the flip phone.
Yeah.
So this is what's interesting about this is that the majority of today's workforce, so we're talking like 35%, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 35% of the labor force is made up of millennials. Yeah. Which kind of makes sense because you're seeing that the Gen Xers and the latter half of the baby boomers and into the Gen Xers are starting to retire.
Yeah.
And so this is the next generation coming up, you know, and we'll be taking on a lot of the things and frankly, moving things forward, probably to degrees we will not even understand because they're pretty bright and resourceful and creative. And in terms of like how they parent, I find it kind of interesting that it's really viewed that they're a little bit more, I don't want to say casual, but not as uptight.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. With how they manage their kids or what have you. They're a little bit more open about them. Probably even conversations are more open. Yeah, they're
open and more aware that there's, so much that we've learned about feelings.
Yeah.
Feelings. And being able to talk about feelings and not, not shaming your child for having emotion. Yeah. The emotions that they should be having, when I was a kid,
we didn't talk about
me,
that
but
stuff. Boys,
well, it's just like, stop crying. Yeah. You're fine.
Quit being a baby.
Yeah. Quit being a baby, that kind of thing. And I'm sure we said that to our kids at some point. We did,
Suck
but
it up.
now but now my kids, I see them parenting and it's very different.
And you don't hear them say those kinds of things.
They're much more aware of allowing their children to have these feelings that they're going through and empathizing with them because we didn't do that for them.
No, I don't think we did.
Stop crying. You're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's like toughen up.
It'll be all right.
I can think of, but those are the things we were told.
Yeah. Get up, walk it off.
Yeah.
Again, just like we were talking about with the silent generation and how their kids were more aware. Same thing. I see that now with the way that in regard to that, what we did with our kids and how these millennials now are much more aware and they want to do better than we did for their kids. Disclaimer, one of Michelle's disclaimers. I'm sorry, guys. I had 4 boys. Just did the best we could.
They're all alive.
We had,
And I think that's with a lot of parents. You do the best you can because it's like you don't take any lessons in parenting. All you get is what you got from when you were parented.
But these kids too, the millennials were the last generation to see life before and after complete digital takeover.
Yeah.
So they had a little bit of time. And I think about that with my boys because they were out riding their bikes all day long. They did a lot of that. And they were a combination of a few different things here. Latchkey kids, because both my husband and I were working.
Yep.
And so they did all of that. But then I can remember when my third child, Derek, was 3 and we had a computer and I just very distinctly remember this moment and he was playing a game on the computer and he took the disc out. He just
knew what to do.
All the things to do. And I was like, he's 2. He was like 2 or 3 years old and he was able to navigate and do all that. So very, very normal. And he's now 30, 31. So he grew up for the most part having all that, access to those things. But
they even were teaching a lot of it in school or they were using computers.
But my older 2 didn't. They saw some before. That's why I say they saw that before and after they remember.
Yeah. The generations prior to this were going to the library to get the information that they needed. They weren't able to look it up they weren't able to Google it. They weren't able to look it up that way. It was an interesting time frame too, because they were around and would be aware of things like 9/11.
Yeah.
I can can recall Zoe, for example, she was in kindergarten when 9/11 happened, and they did these drawings at school.
Oh.
She did this little book of the towers and them getting crashed into, and Osama bin Laden, all this stuff. They actually took the book and copied it and kept it. But she had an understanding of it. We didn't really hide a lot of that stuff.
Right.
Tremendous amount of pride, you know, in being an American and all that. Heck, I think one of our family pictures, they're all wearing red, white, and blue at the time. But definitely it was a different time, you know, that I think probably one of the first times that perhaps they were not necessarily feeling completely safe. You don't know what the common enemy is. Airports locked down, and still to this day, they have so many stringent rules about what you can do and what you can bring and all that. All of those things were times when they were growing up.
Yeah.
So they probably remember what it was like before. To some degree. We certainly do.
Yeah.
You know, when you could just go and it was no big deal. Now it's, you know, a whole ordeal.
So there's this one description of these millennials, and if you don't mind, I want to read it because I think it's said very well just about them. They're a highly progressive, empathetic generation that was the first to integrate moral values into the workplace, striving only to work in environments that aligned with their core socio-political values, even at the cost of a pay cut.
Yep.
Which I see that, and it's very true. Yeah.
And actually that's even a conversation that I've had with my oldest because his work-life balance has been something so important to him. And then during the pandemic, obviously they were working at home. After the pandemic, and probably a little ways after the pandemic, they were all going back full time to these job sites. So he's gone from working from 7 to 4:30 to working from, you know, being gone at 5:30 to get to the job site, getting home. It's just a complete, and he was like, I would make less money if I could have more control over my schedule.
Yeah.
And I was actually kind of surprised because I guess the way that we always did things before was just what we never even occurred to me to do it differently.
Yeah.
You know, it's just how it was. That's how you got ahead in this world. That's how you did whatever. And they look at it differently.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of proud of them. So who do you think some millennial famous people might be?
I have no idea.
Well, who is dating Travis Kelce?
Oh, is Taylor Swift?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so she's a millennial.
Yeah, guys, Travis Kelce's a football player for Kansas City Chiefs, and he's dating
Taylor
Swift.
Swift.
I think they're darling.
Yeah.
Guys do not like it because they don't think he's focused, but that's a whole nother story.
Whatever.
But yeah, Taylor Swift she's 34.
Okay.
She is a millennial. Who are some other ones?
We've got Dwayne Johnson.
Dwayne The Rock.
The Rock. Can you smell what The Rock's cooking?
I like him.
Kendall Jenner.
Okay.
LeBron James.
Oh, okay.
And this one is not surprising. Mark Zuckerberg.
Oh, yeah.
So
there you go.
Think of all the technology stuff and things that came from his brainchild.
Yep. Facebook, Meta, all that kind of stuff is from him. That is the millennial category there. So what comes after millennials?
XYZ.
Gen Zers.
Yeah.
Which one of these generations, and we were talking about this before, is kind of more, this is very general, obviously, for all of you Gen Zers, but is kind of a more selfish generation?
This one.
It is. Okay. I couldn't remember if it was this one or if it was the millennials.
One.
Yeah.
I have 3 millennials and a Z. Yes, it's generalities, but it's just the whole way that they have and what they've had access to that makes them so different. My older 3, which are millennials, they talk about how different and they're very different. His communication style, just a lot of things. Yeah. It's very different.
Well, this is like the age of texting.
So these are let's start with when they were born. Yeah. So these Gen Zers were born between the years of 97 to 2010.
Yeah. So as we've noticed with these newer generations or people that are in that time frame, I think that communication sucks. I mean, it's because the vast majority of it is through text messaging or through the internet. And so written. And I think it's just really interesting, like how people deal with issues or how they connect with people. I mean, this is also the age of online dating. I mean, you're not even meeting people the same way that they were back in the olden days.
Back in the day.
Back in the day. Yeah. In the wild, I think is what people say. They met people in the wild. This is the first generation to really kind of exist without knowledge of what it's like to grow up without digital technology.
Right.
They don't know any different. They don't know what a 8-track is. Not that I ever had one, but cassette tapes, all those things, even CDs. It's like all the type ways music has been given to us. It's like they don't even use any of that stuff. It's all streamed.
Yeah.
So, and of course, we have followed suit on a lot of these things too.
That's why I like to think of us as digital immigrants. They're digital natives. We're digital immigrants.
Yeah. We're digital.
You know, we've had, it's been introduced to us and we've had to adapt and change with that.
I guess the good news though is that we know the difference. And so when, like I'm talking about the communication aspect of things, there's so many things about texting that are so dangerous. You don't know inflection, you don't know tone, you don't know, that's what emojis are all about, that's what they were designed for. But there's so many misinterpretations of things. And frankly, it's like now bullying isn't just bullying in person, it's bullying online. I mean, so I think people have a lot more, they feel like they have a lot more power to say what they want to say when it's hurtful and ugly and stuff when they don't have to face somebody.
Right.
So anyway, a lot of that is definitely in this generation, in this time frame. This is also the generation of activists.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, coming around now full circle.
Yeah. I could see that.
More of a voice. People are having more of a voice. So they're more aware of the political landscape, for example, more aware of the things that are happening in our world. And a lot of that's because it's so readily available.
Well, they don't know life without cell phones. And therefore they have access to everything and everyone.
Yep.
It's just a click of a button.
The
whole internet.
Moment's notice.
Like, it's a global generation in that sense.
Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I mean, it's a good thing. You can say the same thing about guns. It is. It's not the guns that shoot the people. It's the people that shoot somebody else.
Yeah.
And you could say the same thing with the internet. It's the person that has the power to do with whatever it is at their fingertip. That's why I feel like there's got to be such a greater amount of pressure for parents to be really actively involved with what their kids are doing.
Well, I remember it being a struggle when our kids were younger. Some of those, we just didn't even know what was available.
Right.
But trying to even get a handle on any of that was a joke. Now it would be even more difficult.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of pressure on parents to have those communication tools for their kids, like the phones for their kids. And so it turns into this whole other thing because they don't even make, unless you've got a burner or something, most phones have internet access.
Yeah.
You have to kind of buy them that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a lot tougher to raise children of this generation. Yeah. And on the flip side of that, even though these kids don't know any better, I think it's a lot tougher to be a kid. Because
absolutely.
There's just that life is not simple.
Yeah.
It's more complicated. There's more going on in this world, that there is just a level of, maybe feeling more unsafe.
Well, and just think about, I'm just thinking about the drinking the water out of a garden hose. I mean, now it's like
it has to be purified.
It has to be purified, or you need to buy it at the store and drink it out of a bottle or add something to it. Or, I didn't die. I drink water out of the tap and out of a hose my whole life.
I know. Probably still would, given the opportunity.
I probably would. I probably have recently. Not out of the tap, but I know there's a lot more environmental things that come into play. There's just it's so much more complex.
Yeah, to be a kid.
On all levels.
Yeah.
Just environmentally that you have to deal with, to make decisions about, all of that stuff.
Well, and I think the social aspect of things is definitely an issue with this group, just because there are so many different ways that they're communicating and not communicating, or there's just a level of indifference. It strikes me as kind of this indifference around things that to us would be important, work ethic, things that to me, I'm just kind of like, no, you need to not, you hear about, people say, if I don't like it, I'll just quit. Or, oh, they're not giving me what I want, so I'll just quit.
Yeah.
And it's like, it just blows my mind to even hear that. But that is what you kind of run across with people that are kind of in this age group. So when we were looking at the people who were famous, I was cracking up because I literally only knew a few.
Yeah.
And that right there was telling me, I'm like, holy cow. It's like, I am not in tune with this generation at all. I mean, obviously our kids and stuff are a part of this generation, but some of the things that the people that are their age that they know, I'm like, I have no clue who they are. So a couple of them I do, like Billie Eilish.
Yeah.
I know who she is.
Yeah.
And she's quite the rebel. Ariana Grande. Sorry, my bad.
Ariana Grande. Who else?
Thank you. Next.
Yeah.
Lil Nas X. I know.
Okay. Next.
And Kylie Jenner.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's Kylie Jenner,
name.
which I thought was interesting that like her sister Kim didn't even come up, and she would have been she's probably a millennial. She's 41 or 42, maybe.
I don't know how old she is.
Yeah, maybe she's a Gen Xer. Anyway, but her name didn't come up, but her sisters did, which I thought was kind of interesting. The generation that comes after this one is going to be the one that never has had anything that's not been digital.
I think it's kind of frightening to me.
Well,
really. I mean, it's just like a whole other, it's frightening
for
me.
They're also the ones that are entirely in the 21st century.
Yeah.
They have no concept of having lived in the 1900s.
Gen Z?
Yeah.
Right.
No. The next one, Gen Alpha.
Oh, okay.
Which we're not going to even really talk about too much, but it's like this is the generation that's like 2010 forward. So they are only in this millennium, and they don't have any concept of not having anything digital. They don't have everything else is old. It's all from the 1900s is old. I mean, they don't have any. So Jared was born in 2000.
Yeah,
he's
same
born
as Isaac.
And I don't really get that from them. I mean, I feel like that they are, at least what I've noticed so far, very, very similar to their brother and sister and like how they do everything. So I don't know that it's impacted too much. That is the next generation, Generation Alpha. There's not a lot to say about them yet because they're still trying to figure it out.
So that'll be the folks born after 2010.
Yeah.
Okay. So the up and coming.
So
the
right
ones
now,
that are experiencing
right now, they're like teenagers.
Okay.
Yeah, they're going to start experience. So they will remember things, obviously, like the pandemic that took place because they were in school.
Right.
They will probably not have any recollection or anything of what was, well, they won't have any recollection of any of the other things that were happening in the world earlier on in the 2000s, but they're very much aware probably of what's happened recently in Russia or what's happened with any of the other political things that are going on out there because it's everywhere.
Yeah.
If their parents are politically inclined, then they probably will have more knowledge of some of those things because it's from the generation prior that they're learning some of those. So anyway, I think it's been really fun to go through these.
Well, I think my biggest takeaway is that Gen X was the next greatest generation.
You think so?
Just because we're from that for the most.
Yeah. No, I do think that's the one
it's in the middle.
It's right in the middle. Yeah.
It's right in the middle where all the things before and all the things after we have experienced
all of them
had part in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of all of that.
I mean, between our parents
and then being a parent and now our kids and moving forward. So, yeah.
So I would say there's probably things from each one of these generations that we can say that we happily possess. You know, there's things that have come out of all of them that have carried on. It's not like everything's gone from the greatest generation, but it is definitely a different time frame.
But I will say it's important to talk about those things so that it doesn't get lost.
Or it's, written in history books and it's not completely accurate or something.
Right. Write your own history, people.
Exactly.
Personal history.
On that note.
Yeah.
Michelle?
On that note.
Will you go drink out of the water hose now?
It's probably frozen. So not an option.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Download the episode so you can always have it with you, listen to it in the car, whatever you need to do while you're walking. If you want to refer back to anything, that's the best way. Just download, listen, and then delete if you want. So we appreciate that. And we're on all the socials, as you know, and would love any feedback that you have for us.
Yeah. And so until next week.
We
will see you later.
Everybody take care.
Peace out.
Later. Bye.